Hello and welcome to Gadget Joe, and today we're taking a deep look at a really cool item that's got a really strange name. So in today's video we're taking our first look at a DeepCool product. Now this is the DeepCool Assassin IV. Now the Assassin III had a very good reputation. In fact, probably one of the better towel coolers on the market. So it had a really good reputation and some big boots to fill. And we're going to take a look at the Assassin IV today, get it unboxed, see what you get in the box, put it on a system, and then we're going to test it to see how it performs and see if it can take over the crown of the Assassin III. And then that's pretty much it. So at the end of the video, we'll give a bit of a conclusion. So we're going to start off with a box, as you see, and it looks quite simple because it is pretty much a brown box with a cardboard sleeve on it. Now the cardboard sleeve is the part that has all the information on there. Now that's ideal because it saves a bit of money on the printing in terms of the actual box itself. It can just come in a standard brown cardboard box. Now the actual packaging itself does have a nice image on the front, and it looks a bit strange because it's just a big black square, big black cube, and that's pretty much what this cooler is. We're going to take a bit of a closer look at it in a very short while. On the back of the box of a cardboard sleeve there is a lot of information about the product. That has information about the mounting, the fan hardware, and obviously the materials that it's made for, and obviously things like the TDP for the product. And we're going to look at now the actual box itself. So when you take it open, it is presented and packaged very nicely. Very securely, it's all fit and moulded into position so that it doesn't move around in shipping, which is ideal because these are not very cheap. Now you can pick up coolers quite cheaply nowadays. You can get a decent sized cooler for probably 20, 30, maybe £40. These ones currently retail for £75 to £100, so they are on the higher price points. Now what I'm going to try and do in this video is work out exactly why it's on that price point, and we're going to see if the performance of the cooler really does justify that price point. So to start with, you get a little box on the side, which as you can see is another plain cardboard box. There's no fancy unboxings here. Inside this you do get a plethora of accessories there. You also get a grease cleanser and a little application tool, which is quite nice to see. You don't see this in any other coolers really. The application tool is there to help apply the thermal paste onto your processor. The grease cleanser is pretty much as it says. It's to remove any existing thermal paste on your processor. You do indeed get a DM9 Master, which is DeepCool's thermal grease, or thermal paste, whichever you want to call it. There are a lot of good reviews on this thermal paste. It does work very well. Again, you can go for something slightly higher in performance, but for what you get in the box, this is pretty much as good as you're going to get. Next, you get a bag with the actual mounting hardware itself. Now, the mounting on this cooler, from what I've seen, is very intuitive. It already has the retention bar pretty much built into the copper plate on the actual cooler itself, so there's no need to do any additional mounting with that. All you're then having to do is make sure that you've got the bracket. So obviously with Intel you'll use the bracket that's included. It does have some movable ends on there so that you can get it to the right socket on your motherboard. Obviously an AMD motherboard will have their own existing backplate on there. You then get a little tool that's for installing the cooler onto your motherboard. Now it is a long one and we'll see why very shortly, because the actual cooler is a double tower design. That means it's got two fans, two sets of heat sinks on there, and obviously with those being already installed and the fans in place, you can simply remove the middle one. This then goes down and a Phillips screw head on there will basically tighten the cooler onto your motherboard. The other side has a little Allen key part, or a torque key, whichever you want to call it if it's in America. And the reason that that is there is because you have an option to mount an additional fan to the cooler if you need to. Now there are two fans, as I mentioned, on this cooler, which we're going to take a look at very shortly. That is more than enough for what you should need, but if you do wish to add another fan on there, you can do so. All you have to do is use the provided brackets that we have here and install it onto the cooler itself. This will allow you to pull out any of the pins so that you can mount it into position. And then last but not least, you have a little user manual which is inside a nice little cardboard sleeve. Now the user manual is quite simple, it's just plain pictures on there and it is nice and simple to understand. And that's pretty much it for the accessories, so I'm going to put everything back in there for now. And then last but not least, you get the cooler itself. Now when I mentioned at the start of the video that this is a very large product, it is definitely that. We have featured some very large air coolers on the channel before in the form of the Be Quiet Dark Rock Pro 5 and the Dark Rock Elite. Now those are pretty much the direct competitor for this cooler, which we will see in the testing very shortly. These sort of coolers generally, because of a large size and high performance of those fans, are designed to combat AIOs in terms of larger AIOs, and probably a 240 would be the closest sort of comparison, but I often find that these more generally compete with a 360mm AIO. So remove it from the foam packaging, and again you can see it is incredibly large. In fact, it is a very, very heavy unit as well. It comes in at 1,575 grams, so about a bag and a half of sugar, and it is a very heavy cooler. Now the fact that it is such a heavy cooler does need to be taken into consideration when mounting it into your case. Now there's a lot of people that will install motherboards onto their cases with only a couple of screws and miss some out. With a cooler like this, you cannot afford to do that. Make sure you put all the screws in so that it's nice and secure, because this will put some strain on your motherboard. But once it's all mounted and secure, it shouldn't go anywhere. Now obviously, if you have a motherboard in a case that's mounted this way, then that's going to be absolutely ideal. This is not a cooler that's designed to go into a small case, naturally so with the sheer size of it. In fact, it comes in at 160mm in height, 110mm in width, and 140mm in depth. So the design is rather unusual because it is a big cube, and you could argue that it's almost restrictive when it comes to airflow, but they have a very good way of engineering this. Now obviously these are plastic housings on the outside here, and they actually assist in the airflow, or the airflow direction of the cooler, because you've got no airflow coming in from the sides apart from this mesh grill that you see here, which is where the fan sits. You do have the fin stacks here. Now these thermal fins are basically designed in a way that's very aggressively deep cool with that slightly raised and embossed pattern, but those are aluminium heat sinks that are throughout the entire cooler, one stack here and another stack here. Those are designed to dissipate the air evenly and obviously help reduce the temperature of the processor. It is assisted by these 7 6mm copper pipes here. You have 7 of them all in a small combined unit, so that they're really high performance as well. And the bottom cold plate, which is covered by this sticker here, is a copper cold plate that is nickel plated. What's more is it can come apart very simply. All you have to do is hold on to the top here and this front fan will come away. Now this front fan is a 120mm reverse flow unit. Now it's a reverse flow fan because it's designed to draw the air into the cooler. Now when it comes to accessing the middle fan is a larger fan. It's a 140mm unit, and it looks quite difficult to get into because you have that mesh housing on the top. Now the advantage of this is it is a magnetic panel. It can just simply remove, and then you have access to that 140mm fan. And then all you have to do is take the tabs on the side. It is quite difficult to get to, but once you've got it, it just pulls out. And as you can see, you have that large 140mm fan here compared to the 120mm fan at the side. Once you've removed that, you can see those large fin stack designs. This one is slightly narrower than this one on the right here. When you've removed the middle fan, you then have access to the screws that are on the retention plate on the bottom of the cooler, and that's why the long screwdriver comes in handy here. All you have to do here is you see the retention screws at the bottom, you then slide it into position through the middle of the fin stacks, and then you can then proceed to tighten the retention plate to the cooler socket itself. You do have a cable coming out the bottom. There is one single cable, but it does have a daisy chain on there as well. The bottom one is what connects to your motherboard, which is the main CPU cooler socket. It's a 4-pin PWM controller, so you can control the speeds of the fans. Now the fans both do spin up to 1700 RPM, and when they do spin at full speed, they are rated at 29.3 decibels. So they're not an amazingly loud fan, but they are definitely going to spin up quite fast. What's more is when spinning at full speed, the entire cooler is rated to move around 79.1 CFM, that's cubic feet per minute of air, so a significant amount of air in a small space. You do then obviously have these extra additional headers here, and that is simply to connect the fans to them, and then you just have the one single cable connecting to the motherboard. There is no RGB on here, although you do have a small light at the bottom here, and this does light up a light blue. When it's on your system and it's powering up, you have a standard stock speed of 1200 RPM, and this will then light up a dim blue. If you then toggle the switch that's on the top here, it can go from a low power to a high power fan mode, and this is what will spin it up to full speed of 1700 RPM. Now, to know that it's in full speed in your system without being able to audibly hear the increase, the DeepCool logo on the front will be a much brighter blue. Just a nice little addition to there, and just a nice little touch there as well. When it's all back in and obviously installed onto your system, it looks absolutely fantastic. Even though it is a effectively large big black cube, it looks very streamlined, very effective, and it looks very modern as well. Now, when it comes to RAM clearance on a cooler of this size, obviously there's going to be some limitations. Now, what they have done to combat this is they've allowed you to manipulate this fan. So what you can do is take it off the clips on the front and then simply raise it up to the next level, and as you can see, you then have an additional amount of clearance over your RAM module, so that even a taller set of RAM should fit in nice and easily with this cooler. The testing of the Assassin IV yielded some very interesting results indeed. All tests were performed on the cooling test setup, which is an Intel i7-13700KF 16-core 24-thread CPU on an ASRock Z790 Taichi Lite with a 48GB Patriot Viper 5 Elite DDR5 RAM set and an Innerchill RTX 3080 Ti. We compared the results directly with both air and AIO coolers, some smaller, some larger, for a variety of results. To begin with, we tested all coolers under the 3D Mark CPU profile benchmark, which puts the CPU under stress to find out its performance scores across 16, 8, 4, 2 and single core benchmarks. This then causes the CPU to utilise all cores and really push it to the limit, which in turn transfers to heat from the processor. The Assassin IV absolutely smashed this out of the park by beating every cooler we have tested on this system with a score of 48.4 degrees, even beating the gigantic CR360 by EK. I then ran a couple of CPU intensive games in the form of Fortnite and Cyberpunk 2077. I first ran Fortnite in 1080p at ultra high quality settings for 30 minutes, and the results were the same again, with the Assassin coming up trumps with a 54.8 degree result. Running Fortnite once again at 1440p at ultra high for 30 minutes, we started to tighten the gap up a bit. The Assassin then fell just short of the CR360 here, but still got a very, very promising temperature. Finally, we ran Fortnite at 4K quality at ultra high for 30 minutes to push it a little bit more, and the gap tightened even more with the Assassin hitting 62.9, a very similar score to the CR360 and the two Be Quiet large air coolers in testing. Cyberpunk proved a little bit more challenging for the coolers over Fortnite, naturally so with all the additional rendering and shaders needed. We tested it for 1 hour at 1440p at ultra settings, and the results were impressive, beating both the Elite and DarkRock Pro 5 and falling just short of the CR360. Finally, I set to render a 4K 30-minute video using DaVinci Resolve. Video rendering is primarily CPU intensive. Newer systems and graphics cards can help with the final stages of rendering, but predominantly it is a CPU intensive task. This time round, the Assassin IV claimed back the victory, beating all the coolers in testing. Granted, it was a very close margin, but it definitely seemed to perform very well under a moderate to high load. Installation of the Assassin IV was super simple, as you can see right now. All you have to do is basically take into consideration which board you want to use for the cooler. Now, the Assassin IV has a wide range of compatibility. In Intel, you have 1150, 1151, 1155, 1200, 1700, which is the socket we're using today, 2011, 2011-3, 2066, and with AMD, it's just simply AM4 and AM5. So a good catalogue of back compatibility for this cooler as well. So as you can see on this motherboard, which is not the test system that we're going to be using later on in the video, it is just simply another Z790 motherboard with an LGA 1700 socket, for the purpose of the installation process. This does need the Intel backplate that we see here. Now the Intel backplate can be positioned and changed to fit depending on the motherboard that it's going to be going on. All you have to do to manipulate this is simply maneuver the edges of the backplate into the correct position. Then you need to feed the threads that you see through the holes on the back of the motherboard. With AMD, you don't need to do this because you already have a backplate from the existing cooler, but it does work in the same principle. What you need to do then is, once you've got that backplate into position, you'll be able to see those 4 threaded screws at the bottom of your motherboard on the correct orientation. All you then do is take these 4 thumb screws, position them over the screws that are protruding through the motherboard, and then tighten them into position. Do not tighten them too tight because you can cause damage to the motherboard. What you then need to do is take the 2 mounting plates that you see here, position them inwards so that the curved parts face inwards towards the processor, align them over the threaded parts of the thumb screws that you've just recently installed. Now, using the additional screwdriver that is included, you can simply screw these into position with these screw tops here. Make sure that you tighten them nice and secure, but again, they don't need to be extremely tight, they just need to be hand tight so that there's no damage to the motherboard. Now is the point where you apply the thermal paste to your processor. Now there's no right or wrong way of doing this, but the included application tool will come in handy here so that you can spread it out nice and evenly. As long as you don't protrude over the sides of a processor, you should be fine. Now we need to take the cooler itself and remove the sticker that's on the cold plate. Take away the middle 140mm fan, line the cooler up over the processor. Do not put any pressure down here yet because you need to line up the 2 screws that you see here with the 2 threaded holes that are on those mounting arms that we've just recently installed. Now you can start to tighten them. What I would recommend doing here is maybe 2 or 3 turns for each screw, alternatively, so then you're not actually going to put all the pressure on one side. Keep rotating from one side to the other until it is hand tight. This will allow the cold plate to make maximum contact to your processor and also eliminate any concern of uneven spread of thermal paste. Now that that's done, you can proceed by putting the fan back into position. Once you've done that, all you need to do is make sure all the cables are connected up in the relevant places and your 4-pin PWM header is connected on your motherboard correctly, and that is it. That's all it needs to be done. And that brings us to the end of our review and testing of the DeepCool Assassin IV. Now this is my first hands-on experience with a DeepCool product in general, and I was left very, very impressed. I knew that this cooler had big boots to fill with the Assassin III's legendary status. Now, I will say that the Assassin III, in some instances, would probably perform slightly better, down to the fact that it has a more open, thin design. But this actually does seem to do it much more efficiently. Now, this closed design, as I mentioned earlier in the video, assists in directional airflow. You've got that 120mm high-speed reverse flow fan, drawing all the air into the cooler. Now that air, no option but to go through those fin stacks into the middle fan. Now the middle fan is designed to basically take all of that air and produce more air, and then obviously fire it onto the actual processor itself, and obviously remove the heat from the heat pipes that's basically carrying heat away from your processor. So the design of it is very, very well engineered, and they've obviously put a lot of thought and time and attention into designing it the way it is. When it comes to performance, it's absolutely smashed everything out the park. It actually outperforms the EKCR360, which is a 360mm AIO, which is actually widely regarded as one of the better AIOs in the 360mm AIOs on the market. And this thing actually absolutely blew the Dark Rock Elite and the Dark Rock Pro 5 out of the water, which really surprised me because when I reviewed them, I couldn't really think of many other coolers that could sort of top their performance, and this one just did that in absolute buckets. Now, it is a fantastic cooler, and it's definitely something I'm going to be using myself and a personal build for my editing rig. So when it comes to that £75 to £100 price point, I definitely do think that it is worth every penny. Now, if you can pick one of these up for the £75 price point, you've got an absolute bargain. Expect to pay around 85 to 95 in a standard sort of price point from most retailers. It is an investment, but it's definitely a worthwhile investment. The fact that you can get all of that performance from a single cooler, which is just a simple black cube, is definitely something worthwhile. Now, installation of the cooler was super simple, as you saw. Just took a couple of screws to mount the actual cooler to your motherboard. With that design of the backplate being able to change the sizing, means that it is compatible with a huge array of coolers. And that's pretty much it. There's not really a great deal else I can say about it. It's been performing absolutely fantastically. In fact, it's pretty much one of the best coolers I've had my hands on, and it's nice to see how much thought and attention has gone into the design. Now, this is the first DeepCool product that I've had my hands on, as I've mentioned, and it's definitely set the bar quite high for DeepCool products in the very near future, but I'm hoping to get my hands on as well. They have an absolute gem of a product here, and it's a very, very impressive product. Now, it's quite hard to top a cooling performance of something like that, so I'm welcoming any coolers on the market that can sort of take away the title that this now currently holds. The build quality of the entire thing is very, very good as well. Now, again, it is, as I've mentioned multiple times, a higher price point, so you expect a bit of a premium in terms of build quality. You definitely get that here with this Assassin 4. Now, the build quality is very good. As you can see, you can take everything off. It's really quite modular. Everything is super simple. It would be nice, maybe, to see some form of magnetic connectivity. So, for example, you can lose this cable here and the cable that's on the 140mm fan, because that was quite fiddly to get in there once it's in there. But once it's in there, obviously, it's all fine. But maybe DeepCool could take in some inspiration for some magnetic connectivity to basically allow a completely cableless design. Obviously, you're going to need a cable for the actual fans, main fans at the bottom anyway, but the actual fans for connectivity on the cooler itself, it would be nice to see some sort of cableless design, just to get rid of that little bit of additional clutter. But again, that's me being a bit finicky and a bit picky, and also being a little bit spoilt because some of the products that I've reviewed recently on the channel do feature magnetic or daisy chaining cableless designs. But overall, would I recommend a product like this? If you're happy to spend upwards of £100 on a cooler, you're not going to be disappointed. If you're not looking for a real high-end thing, or you don't want to spend a lot of money, I would probably try and look at a cheaper option, but just be aware that the performance isn't going to be quite as good as you get from this one. Now, the performance of this cooler will sell itself anyway, so yes, I would 100% recommend this, but just be wary of the price points. Also, be wary of the fact that it is a large, heavy cooler coming in at 1.5 kilograms. So you're going to need to take that into consideration. But with that said, it gets a huge thumbs up from me here at Gadget Joe. And that was it. I've been left very impressed with this cooler. So I've been Gadget Joe. This has been the DeepCool Assassin 4. I will leave a link in the description down below, as always, to where you can get your hands on one. While you're down there, don't forget to click like and subscribe to help the channel grow. And that's pretty much it. So until next time, goodbye.